Hello everybody, welcome back to the Supreme Court Decision Timeline, Episode 2. Our current Supreme Court, as of right now in the timeline, 1809, was a 5-4 conservative court as the Democratic Republicans are starting to put in more liberal judges, or justices. And we started off with nothing noteworthy in 1809, so that's perfect. In 1810, Associate Justice William Cushing dies, and Robert Trimble is appointed to the House of Representatives, to the Supreme Court by the House. And President John I would sign the Mackin Bill No. 2, and he would annex Florida in this year. In 1811, Associate Justice Samuel Chase would pass away, and John McLean would be appointed to replace him in the Supreme Court. 1812, President John I would enact a 90-day embargo on the United Kingdom, which would make him more unpopular than he already is, which would begin the War of 1812, which, perfect, this is what we need, a war. And we also have an election, which Democratic-Republican Vice President James Madison would defeat Federalist Mayor DeWitt Clinton to win re-election. In 1813, there's nothing noteworthy besides the war. 1814, the U.S. and the U.K. signed the Treaty of Ghent, which is ending the war. However, it officially ends in 1815, because that's when the news gets back to the country. There was also the Great September Gale of 1815, which was the first massive hurricane in New England for 100 years, I think. In 1816, President John I signs the Dallas Tariff Act, which puts tariffs on the UK for trade. In the 1816 vice presidential election, Democratic-Republican Secretary James Monroe defeats Federalist Senator Rufus King 154-63 to become the 5th vice president. In 1817, Vice President Madison would veto the bonus bill. It never reaches John I. The U.S. and UK would sign the Rush-Bagot Treaty, which establishes the northern border of the United States. And also the First Seminole War begins. In 1818, the U.S. flag would be adopted, as well as the First Seminole War ending. President John I would meet with his cabinet regarding Andrew Jackson's, his actions in the First Seminole War. And the U.S. and Chickasaw Nation would sign the Treaty of Tuscaloosa, and the U.S. and UK would sign the Treaty of 1818. In 1819, there would be the Panic of 1919, which would be the first financial crisis within the United States, and this would make John I even more unpopular. In 1820, President John I would sign the Missouri Compromise, which makes him a little more popular, but it would be turned a bad decision on his part. He would also sign the Land Act of 1820. And we would also have Democratic-Republican Vice President James Monroe defeating Federalist Mayor DeWitt Clinton 138-94 to win re-election. 1821, there is nothing noteworthy. 1822, there was a major yellow fever outbreak. 1823, President John I passes the Monroe Doctrine, which is Vice President Monroe's idea. However, he didn't want to do this. Many members of Congress would persuade him to do so. 1824, the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs is founded, and Democratic-Republican Secretary John Adams would defeat Democratic-Republican Senators Andrew Jackson and William Crawford 145-72-40 to win, but he loses the popular vote to become the 6th vice president. Henry Clay is running because he's coaxed by John Adams not to run. 1825, the Treaty of Indian Springs and the Treaty of St. Louis is signed. 1826, President John I passes away in Tennessee, and the Supreme Court, controversially, this is the most controversial decision made by the Supreme Court yet, as they make Tennessee Senator Andrew Jackson the 3rd president by a vote of 6-3. Their argument is that Andrew Jackson deserves something since he lost the popular vote to John Quincy Adams in the vice presidential election. As, you know, he won the popular vote but lost the election, is what I meant to say. And the Treaty of Washington signed, there is the Fredonian Rebellion as well. 1827, there is nothing noteworthy. 1828, Associate Justice Henry Livingston passes away, and he's replaced. Also, Robert Trimble also passes away, and Henry Baldwin and James Moore Wayne replaces them. President Andrew I would pass the Tariff of 1828, and the first change to election is Democrat Senator John Calhoun would defeat National Republican Vice President John Adams 187-83 to become the 7th president. He wins in a landslide. Chief Justice Bushrod Washington dies, and he's replaced by Roger B. Taney by the Senate. There's also the Cincinnati riots of 1829. And now that's the end of the timeline. The current Supreme Court is 7-2 liberal, as the only two conservative judges are Associate Justice John Chew Thomas and Associate Justice John Marshall. The rest are liberals. And that is the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is the Chaotic One saying, peace.